This morning we're talking about doubt. And when was the last time you dealt with doubt, or when you struggled with doubt? I think that doubt is just kind of a part of life. In this last couple of weeks, as I've been thinking about this, I'll tell y'all what, let me give y'all a preacher secret. You know what the best way to make something gnarly in your life happen? Make the decision to preach on it in a couple of weeks. And I'll tell you what, it's been a very interesting roller coaster for me, because the second I realized this is what we were talking about, I started thinking about it a few weeks ago. There's doubt pops up in my life. Sometimes, like we talked earlier about the rain season, this time of the year, sometimes we think it will never be dry again, or it will never be warm again. Like when we were cursing the 108 degree with 95% humidity in August, we need to remember there's times where we wanted that in our life. Ever hear you say that you get what you want? Like that comes around. I mean, there's the silly sides of doubt, but there's also just a serious side of doubt. We'll talk about it later on, but if you've been around here before, you know that we're waiting to put a parking lot in so we can move to a more permanent worship space. I'll tell y'all right now, every single day that it's raining makes me doubt if that's ever going to happen. Because I know we need, I'm sure every day, a couple of weeks ago, I was like, yeah, I just need five good dry days. I'm sure now it's 10 good dry days. Just doubt, it just plagues you. No matter where we are in life, we can't get away from doubt. It's like when you grow up and you realize there's not a magic adult button that gets pressed at some point in time. There's not this button of maturity where doubt does not plague you. It just changes as we go on. But doubt's an interesting thing. And just thinking about it a lot these last few weeks, we struggle with doubt because I think many times we think that doubt and disbelief can be the same thing. That we feel bad about doubt. When we doubt somebody, when we doubt something, when we doubt God, when we doubt, and we feel bad about doubt, but we equate doubt to be disbelief. But doubt's a very different thing. When we doubt, we're just calling into question. That doubt is this psychological, no man's land between two things. And often it's the thing that we want to be true and the thing that we're scared is actually true. And that we're living on the edge of that. And we don't know what we're going to do with it. Doubt is this place that we can get. It's this mental state where our mind just suspended between two things. And where does doubt come from? What happens when we deal with doubt? And the good thing is, I think that in the Bible, we find doubt across almost the entire book, the entire thing from Genesis to Revelation. In some ways, you can say this is just a story of humans' struggle with doubt. That edge between what you want to be true and what you're terrified is true. And so this morning, we're going to continue the story of Elijah. We talked about him last week and all the crazy things that happened to him. And we're going to just pick up literally right after the fact almost today. And we're going to look at doubt and how Elijah doubted. We're going to look at how we can have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows within the same season of life. And what that was like for Elijah, but also what that's like for us. And the thing that we're going to talk about the most, that when we look at doubt and the dangers of doubt, is just this one idea, and it's going to come back across this piece of scripture multiple times. But it's never roll alone. Never roll alone. So let's open the Bible up, 1 Kings chapter 9. We're going to read 8 through 18 today. And to see the opposite place where Elijah is this week from where he was last week. So what scripture says, so he got up and he drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And there he came to a cave where he spent the night. But the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah replied, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down their altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Go out and stand before me on the mountain," the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and he went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied again, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. And I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." And the Lord told him, "Go back the same way you came and travel to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive there, anoint Hazael to be king of Aram, and then Jehu, grandson of Nimshi, to be king of Israel, and anoint Elijah, son of Shaphat, from the town of Abel-Meholah, to replace you as my prophet. And anyone escaped from Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and those who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha. Yet I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel who have never bowed down to Baal or kissed him." So a wild story, a bunch of crazy stuff, right? I mean, does this make sense to you? Like, do I have to talk about this now? I mean, we got this under control? Y'all, it's kind of crazy. Like somebody, Jason Line, they're not here today. He told me last week, he's like, "That's like the wildest story in the Bible." I was like, "Oh no, that's tame. There's all sorts of crazy stuff coming up." But so Elijah, after all the stuff that happened just the previous chapter, so he's the prophet. He said it's not going to rain for 3 years, and he goes and like hides out in the woods while people are trying to kill him. Then he shows back up, and he has like the Thunderdome of the Old Testament, and ends up like calling fire down, and he slaughters 450 prophets of this false god named Baal. And now we find him today. And he takes a journey of 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai. And we're going to talk more about Mount Sinai in a little bit, but let's just think about that very first thing that God asked him. He says, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" What are you doing here? Now, there's stuff that's going on that's part of this process, because I think that God's not just asking him like a physical question, but emotionally. Like, what happened to get you to this place emotionally? So he has all the cool stuff happen we talked about last week, just talked about now, right? So right after, and what's weird is like we talked about, this was the thing that most people want to talk about last week after the sermon. Usually people want to talk about like really cool things the week after Sunday. This last week, I got like 15 like text messages about, so he slaughtered the prophets of Baal? Like, what does that look like? It's even weirder because in the Hebrew, it didn't use the word slaughter, it used the word butcher. Like, or if you're a redneck, it's like processed. Like he processed 450 prophets of Baal. That's weird. So after this, he looks at the king and he doesn't kill this king. And the rain begins to come, and rain hasn't come in 3 years. And so here's Elijah. He prophesies this rain would not come, and God gave him the power to make the rain come again. And the rain comes again. He's right there in front of the king. You have to imagine how excited he is. And so he literally runs alongside of or in front of the king's chariot all the way back to the palace. Now, I've never seen a chariot. You might have seen a chariot before. But I cannot imagine I cannot run fast enough to run ahead of a chariot. And it says that he does this all the way back to the king's palace, and he goes into and he meets the queen, and the queen hates Elijah. The queen's name is Jezebel. It's like all the pop culture references that we might have about someone's a Jezebel or this kind of thing. Like it comes from this lady. Like she was crazy. And she was mean. Like mean. Like imagine the meanest person you know and amplify that. So here comes Elijah thinking he's at the tip top of his game. I mean, the prophet who can handle like calling rain to come and rain to not come. And he runs ahead of the chariot for miles. And he shows up in the queen's, and he's there, he's figuring there's gonna be vindication and all this is gonna be fixed and everything's gonna be good. And the king's like, I'm gonna kill you. So then he runs and hides out in the woods again. Actually, he goes to a tree and asks God to kill him underneath the tree. And then an angel wakes him up. We picked up the story today. It says, you need to eat. And you're going to travel for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai. And that's what he decides to do. So Mount Sinai, this is an important place. It's like Moses, like the burning bush. I'm familiar with this story. Like, that's Mount Sinai. Like the 10 Commandments, the 2 times that Moses got them, Mount Sinai. Like the golden calf, Mount Sinai. The whole back half of Exodus where God gave his people the plans for the tabernacle where they would worship him for the first time. And they built all this and learned how to worship and learned how to do all this kind of stuff. Mount Sinai. Jesus later spends 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai as well. But this Mount Sinai for the Jewish people, this is like Plymouth Rock and Mount Rushmore rolled into one alongside of the whole spiritual dimension. Like, this place is super important. This is actually Mount Sinai behind you. You can go there. They got a place where there's a monastery that's been there since the 2nd century. There's a place, they call it, it's like Elijah's pasture. But this is a huge, important place. And in Elijah's mind, with everything that's going on, the way his doubt, where he's just kind of teetering on this edge, and he's like, I need to go talk to God. And if you need to go talk to God, there's one place that you go. You go to where the whole thing started. So when God's saying, what are you doing here? It's a very loaded question. Like, what is going on that makes you try to encounter me like this? In this way. See, Elijah's doubt is not a truth statement. Elijah's doubt is a validity statement. He's thinking about all the cool things he's been part of and all the crazy things that God has done in front of him, all the crazy things that God has done through him, just the whole 9 yards. And he's back in the same place he started off at, hiding out in the woods because a crazy woman wants to kill him. And even after God asked him the second time, what are you doing here? He repeats himself. He's like, I'm all by myself. Everybody's trying to kill me. There's no one left, and I'm the best one that's out there. Like, that's that statement kind of rolled into our everyday language. He is making assumptions about what God wanted to do, making assumptions about how God wanted to do it. And he's worked himself into a place of disastrous doubt. Beyond, he went through the I want to die phase 40 days before this. He's even deeper into doubt than that right now. And God's just asking that question, what are you doing here? See, from where Elijah is in this story, he's become accustomed to the big dog and pony show. He's been accustomed to building altars and calling fire down from heaven. He's been accustomed to telling the rain to not come and for the weather to mind him for years. He's accustomed to running so fast and so far he can he can go out ahead of a chariot. He's been accustomed to just multiple things. He's accustomed to big, he's accustomed to extravagant, he's accustomed to fancy, he's accustomed to elaborate, all of these ways of God being expressed and God showing his kingdom. But the way that he encounters God now will be very different. Think about that. He saw the storm that came in, the earthquake, the fire. If I would have seen any one of those things, I would be gone. Imagine all that rolled into one. I was thinking about this week. Remember that the image that was going across Facebook a couple of months ago of the fires in California of the freeway? I'm thinking about that, and God's not. He's seeing all that kind of stuff, and God comes to him in this whisper, in a very, very different way than Elijah has become accustomed to hearing from God and to experiencing God. That this false framework, Elijah's whole life's been dedicated to fighting idolatry, to fighting a false picture of God. And now Elijah has worked himself into his own false picture. His doubt comes because he had been accustomed to God doing things one way. And also think about this, what if Elijah thought he had won? Imagine what he might be feeling when he walks into the king's courtroom alongside of the king to face the king's wife, who is his real enemy. And he's expecting the king to be like, listen, you're wrong, he's right, we're going to do this his way now. And like the exact opposite happens. I mean, Elijah probably thought like he had pulled it off. Look at that emotion and he's now sitting there and realizing that I'm no better than anyone else. And God agreed. God's like, I'm not going to put up with your bull anymore on this. I'm going to do things, and you're going to encounter me in the way that you came here to encounter me, but you're going to encounter me in the way that you did not expect to encounter me. You were probably waiting for me to do something even wilder than what you've already seen, and it just does not happen. Elijah is in thick with rolling by himself and self-determining everything else. His framework is blown. So there's some dangerous things about doubt. There's some dangerous things about where Elijah is inside of this. And this is it. When we create places for doubt to succeed, we're creating space for sin to enter and reign. And not sin is like this little idea of sin, of just a do's and don'ts, of nice moral suggestions, but of sin being the thing that can eat apart our life and destroy every single thing, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Sin is the most destructive force in our life. When we create places for doubt to succeed, we create spaces for sin to enter and reign. But whenever we give these lands of doubt, these worlds of doubt that we have created, whenever we give those places we struggle with to Jesus, he will create space for holiness to thrive. It's whenever we just take the power out of doubt. And then we make the decision of we're not going to live into that false truth in our life. Because we all have the ability to create those, and we all do create those at times. We never roll alone. That's when we say this, because we look at what Elijah's issue is he thought he was by himself. This whole time, all along, and the whole story of Elijah has been I. Never roll alone. We never think that God is solely dependent on us. We never need to think that God will work in a way that always immediately makes absolute sense to us. How many times I've done that? A lot. But never think that our hurts and our pains and our fears and our doubts aren't a priority to God. Because they always are. We give that space over to him. Never roll alone. When I think about doubt, and I think about the ways that I struggle with doubt, when I remember this, it's this middle point between what we want, what we know is true, and what we're scared might be true. The things that we can hold on to are the things that can absolutely spin us off into chaos. Doubt's that place in the middle. Doubt's about fear. What scares you? When I was a kid, I was scared of the dark. I slept with a hall light on until I was 13 years old. After I was 13, I found out a way around it, but then when I was in college, I had a roommate that liked to sleep with the guy that put the tape over the red light on the TV to block out that much of light. That's when I actually became not scared of the dark. I was 19, lived with Ricky Thompson. Like we all have, I talk with this a lot of time. I'm scared of fish. Like legit. If you don't believe me, ask Ben Nicholson. He's seen it in action. Like fears stop us. I took a fish off the line for the first time 2 years ago because my 5-year-old niece made fun of me for being scared of fish. Like Callie, like she's freakishly small. I mean, she's like that tall. It's like a fun-sized Snicker bar making fun of you. Like, I doubts her and fears. I'm like, that thing's going to kill me. And my dad's like, it weighs like a half a pound. It's not going to kill you. Like, they're silly fears, but we also have serious fears. Like, what are you scared of? Like, we talked this morning with a lot of folks about Mardi Gras, that kind of stuff. I'm scared of crowds. I'm scared of of crowds that are not predictable. Like, that stops me from a lot of stuff. I drove my entire family crazy. I had an anxiety attack at a water park a few years ago. Because we were at one of these weird crossroads. I also have a fear about being in the way. And like we were at this weird crossroads trying to figure out what water slide we're going to take the fun-size Snicker bar niece on. And we were taking too long. I was like, we're in the way. There's too many people. I don't know what's going on. Like I almost had a guy, Meredith was like, you might have to go home. Like our fears stop us from things. And when we let our fears speak too much into our lives, they will create the danger, disaster zone of doubt. And they do that physically, they do that emotionally, they do that spiritually. Each of us come to God, and what I found out, especially in the Deep South, it's very, very rare that we have to make truth statements about Jesus with people. Most folks like the idea of Jesus. It's those validity. It's like, is he really in charge? Can he really do this? Is it really worth me doing this? It's those validity statements. We all make those. So a few things about doubt. Number one, when we doubt, we get irrational. Okay, this is one of the biggest stories of Elijah. So think about this. I'm not going to read it to you. He says it twice, the exact same thing to God twice. It's like, I'm the only one left. I have been zealous for God, and everybody's trying to kill me. So the first thing, I'm the only one left. So yes, Elijah, you killed your 450 prophets of Baal. You butchered, processed the prophets of Baal. But this whole time, I'm the only one left. You know, there's too much going on in all these chapters to read, but Obadiah has hidden 100 prophets of God in the caves. He did that when Elijah was hiding out in the woods the first time. Later on in this passage, God says, I've preserved 7,000 people who have never bowed down to Baal. And Elijah keeps saying the exact same thing. You have a friend or a family member when they would get scared, it's like they will not shut up. And like you want to hit them over the head with a frying pan because like nothing they're saying is true. It's like Elijah is griping about the exact same thing over and over and over again. I have it written down in my notes, and this was from reading in this earlier this week. I have a hashtag dead horse. And it's like, come on, dude. This is the second time that God asked Elijah, what are you doing here? Like, I almost think that you can see exasperation in that statement. I'm trying to imagine what that might have sounded like. But when we doubt, we get irrational. Isaiah, he isolated and he allowed his fear to overwhelm him. And he believed the lies that sin was speaking into his heart. And he chose to make that a reality in the way that he coped with his doubt. Second thing is when we doubt, we allow false things to control us. You know, it's all right to be irrational from time to time. We all get that. But what happens when we allow our irrationalities to turn into rationalities in our life? How can that throw you off the course? How can that throw you off the relationships that you have with people? How can that remove you from people who will be healthy for you? And we need people to speak into our lives to tell us that we are letting things control us that absolutely have no bearing over us. You know, when we doubt, we forget what we've done and what God has done through us. Elijah stopped the weather for 3 years. He stopped the rain. If one of you can do that for like 30 days, I will buy you lunch for a week. He called down fire from heaven after drowning this sacrifice in gallons of water. When we doubt, we've forgotten about what we've done. Elijah should realize that things are going to work out for him in the end, that he's got access to big stuff. But because he's been by himself, he's not had somebody there to remind him. The fourth thing, when we doubt, we lose everything. Elijah was frustrated because in some ways what he was realizing is, I can do this without God. I can do this without you. And we lose this idea because we shut everyone out of our life. At this point in time, would any of y'all say Elijah's being reasonable? But I can be a very irreasonable person when I'm living in a space of fear. If you don't ask me, ask my 5-year-old niece when I'm pan fishing in a creek. I will get irrational. I will get irreasonable. Ultimately, God says, Elijah, I'm not going to let you go out by yourself anymore. So here are these things that you're going to do. And these people are going to take care of these things in a completely different way. And the last thing you're going to do is you're going to go find this guy named Elisha. And you're going to bring him along with you from this point out. Like, you can't be by yourself. Like, you need a navigator. You need somebody riding shotgun. Like, you don't have the ability to do this alone anymore. The last thing, when we doubt, we forget how big God's world is. One of our core values at Foundry is we believe God's vision for this world is bigger than our vision for the world. When we get into rough spots, when we get into gnarly spots and places of doubt, we begin thinking that our world is very small and there's nothing that anybody has control over and there's nothing that can be done outside of what we see. Right? We begin to live falsely in our own vision of this world. And God's vision for this world is significantly larger than our vision. The big world that God ended up having to show Elijah was a gentle whisper. And sometimes some of us need a gentle whisper. Sometimes some of us need something like a fire and an earthquake and a rainstorm. But when we doubt, we forget how big God's world is. The best answer, the best thing that we have against doubt is making the decision to not do it by ourselves. To not go through this world without God and to not go through this world without other people around us. That we were not meant to be by ourselves. And if Elijah had had one person kind of keeping some sense in him, think about where he might be now. And this is the end of the story of Elijah. He does nothing else extraordinary. And some of us can look at this and say that nothing extraordinary happens because of this situation. But I'll also know that Elijah was called the king of the prophets. And that Jesus spoke about Elijah, that John the Baptist, when he came, he was a picture of Elijah and the faithfulness of Elijah. So we can look at this story and see behavior that might not be the thing that we need to do, but we also look in the bigger picture that Elijah had a big, big story to tell as part of Scripture. But you don't have to go at it by yourself. And when you begin to see doubt creeping in any way, shape, and form, the best thing that you can do is to bring somebody else into your story, to bring somebody else into that place of doubt and to let them cast light, to bring Jesus into that doubt and let him speak the truth of who he is inside of that situation.